Let me start the list. Good. Okay, everybody. Welcome back. This week, our major work of Eastern art takes us to Tibet, to the Potala Palace in the capital city of Tibet, which is Lhasa. Now, of course, Tibet today is no longer an independent country, having been occupied by the Chinese since 1959. But back in the day, Lhasa was the capital of the country, and the country was first very powerful, then very mysterious. So, the Potala Palace itself is a building, as the name suggests. It's a very cool building, and what's inside it is going to give us a window into Tibetan art, painting, sculpture, etc., as well as Tibetan religion and the whole way that they look at the world and live their lives. Right? So that's, you can't ask for more from a major work of art. Okay, now the palace itself, for details, was built over the course of several decades, 1645 to 1694, and Lhasa is here. In case you're not familiar, all of this is China, but this region, basically like this, is Tibet. Okay, and this is the Potala Palace. This is a great picture of the palace, I have to say. It's a very impressive building, and it's on an impressive spot in an impressive setting. So this is a very nice dramatic work, nice way to start the morning. The palace itself, okay, remember our three questions of any work of art are, what is it, who made it, and what were they trying to do? Well, let's answer, what is it? The Potala Palace. It is a fortress monastery in the city of Lhasa. It's a fortress because, as you saw in the picture, it's up on a hill, it's sort of, high and mighty, but it's also a monastery, which is the sort of most important building type in Tibet. It's been called the world's largest wooden skyscraper because it is made of wood and it's large. Technically, it's the world's highest skyscraper, but that's only because Tibet is extremely high, the roof of the world and so forth. So the roof of the Potala Palace is higher than any other skyscraper in the world. The building itself has 13 floors, 1,000 rooms, and 10,000 shrines. This should tell you something about the importance of religion in the life of the Tibetans. And the whole complex, and all of its grandeur, was built without using the wheel. So when you see this mighty building on top of a hill in the mountainous countryside, think of guys actually carrying the materials on their backs up the hill. They did not use the wheel for a reason I will explain later. So you can think about that. Now, why is it called a palace and not just the monastery? Well, it's because the Potala Palace was the former residence of the Dalai Lama. Now, who has not heard of the Dalai Lama? Sometimes it happens. Okay. All right, the Dalai Lama these days is very famous because, he's been kicked out of his own country. He goes around giving speeches and writing books and talking to the UN and so forth. But before 1959, he was the leader of Tibet, both spiritually and politically, and this was his house. Okay, so, the President of the United States has the White House. Dalai Lama had the white and red house. Now, where does it get the name Potala? Just as a side note, Potala is the name of a rock in India, a big rock, which is supposed to be the seat of Avalokiteshvara. I'm going to ask you to dust off in your memories the names of all of these Buddhist figures. Remember, Avalokiteshvara was a bodhisattva. You all saw a picture of him in Ajanta. And the name of the palace comes from the place where Avalokiteshvara is thought to live, or stay once in a while, I guess. Now, Avalokiteshvara is important. He's the most popular and beloved Buddhist figure in Tibet. The Dalai Lama himself, this is a picture of him, is actually thought to be a reincarnation, a rebirth, or more accurately, kind of a projection of Avalokiteshvara. Okay, so when you look at the Dalai Lama, damn, the graphic didn't work. All right, he was supposed to dissolve into a picture of Avalokiteshvara. So they think he is actually, an emanation of Avalokiteshvara himself. He's not just a popular, beloved politician, like, I don't know, John F. Kennedy or something. He's actually a Buddhist deity. Now, it's not just this Dalai Lama who is supposed to be a Buddhist deity. It's not like he lucked out and the other ones were just people. Okay? The Dalai Lama is a very important institution in Tibet. And let's see where it came from. Right? There is an order of monks. You'd call the tariqat over here. There's an order of monks, several orders of monks in Tibet, but the Gelug order is the most important one, the most powerful. They were founded in the 14th century. They're known as the Yellow Hats because they wear a distinctive kind of pointy yellow hat. And they came up with a brilliant method of choosing a leader, which is the head monk, who's called a lama, leads the order and then he dies. Well, what do? He's a monk, so he doesn't have any kids, so he can't have a son. There's no elections or anything. How are they going to pick the new Dalai Lama? The new leader of the order, sorry. Well, they figure he died, but he's going to get reborn somewhere in Tibet. Okay, so what they do is they fan out across the countryside looking for little boys who meet certain criteria. And they have, they quiz him on what he remembers from his past lives and stuff. And sooner or later they find one. And they take him back to Lhasa, and basically now he's the head of the order. But the thing is, he's like 7 years old. He doesn't know anything. And so the other monks have basically, a blank slate that they can mold into the kind of leader they want. So this creates great stability in the order. Now sometimes you get a strong personality, but it's a pretty clever way of picking a new leader, is to brainwash him from childhood. Okay. Now, one of the leaders of the order was named Sonam Gyatso in the 16th century. And he was very close with the Mongols, who at the time were occupying this region of the world. And he became the sort of personal spiritual advisor to the leader of the Mongols, who was Altan Khan. And Altan Khan was so impressed that he gave him the name Dalai Lama. Dalai is Mongolian for great ocean. So it's like his wisdom is as great as the ocean. Now, he in turn, the first Dalai Lama, was very modest, and he said, no, I'm not the great ocean of wisdom. I'm just one of many. So he actually called himself the third Dalai Lama. So the guy before him and the guy before that were the first and second without knowing it. Okay, so the institution of the Dalai Lama comes from the sort of late 16th century. They start at the number 3, and after that it's succession until the present Dalai Lama, who goes around the world, is, I think, I'm forgetting, I think the 16th. Okay, now this, in this terrible light, this is a Tibetan painting of the third Dalai Lama, the founder of the order. You see the typical yellow hat that he wears, that his students wear, and basically all of these little monks in the rest of the picture. Sinim, could I ask you to monitor the lights, and if I ask you to turn them off briefly, could you turn them off so that you can see this better? Tibetan, there you go. Okay, there he is. He's sitting in a classical position. You're going to see a lot of this, with the soles of the feet up and painted red. He's making a teaching gesture. And basically all of these are monks. Tibetan art is all about the details, and Tibetan culture is all about the connections. Okay, who was whose teacher? Who is whose reincarnation? Okay, it's like a big family tree. Okay, and this is a present-day monk of the Gelug order. He's begging for money, as they do, because they're not allowed to actually work. And he's got the typical hat and the sort of red and saffron robes that Tibetan monks wear. Okay, now the Dalai Lama who actually built the Potala Palace was number 5. Okay, and he is known as the Great Fifth. You could turn the light on again briefly so that people can take notes. All right. Now, the great fifth was named Lobsang Gyatso, lived for a good long time in the 17th century, and was an immensely strong personality. Okay? And by dint of personal effort and charisma and so forth, he became the supreme religious and political leader of Tibet in 1637. This is important because you have to understand traditional Tibet was a theocracy. Okay? It's a government by religious people, monks. Okay? What passes for a state is actually just a network of monasteries. And so the number one monk in the country is the number one guy in the country. Tibet only separated religious and political leadership like last July, literally, because the present Dalai Lama gave up his political role. And the Tibetans the Tibetans in India had an election, and so now they have a separate political leader. But that's totally new, like brand new. All right, now the Great Fifth earned his name. He vastly strengthened the monastery system, concentrated all power in his own hands. And in 1642, he decided he needed a new house. Okay? So he took this hilltop in Lhasa, which already had some older structures on top, and he built it up into the Potala Palace, which is something that, as we saw earlier, took several decades. Now, the Great Fifth actually died twice. He died in 1682, but nobody wanted to tell the country because he had ruled it so firmly for so long, they thought that everything would go to pieces. So for 14 years, they pretended he was still alive. Okay, and when people wanted to see him, they'd be like, "Oh, he's very busy. He's meditating or something." Or they would bring out a look-alike and have him sit far away and just nod his head and stuff. And so for 14 years, they pretended he wasn't dead. And finally, in 1696, they accepted reality, and the sixth Dalai Lama came along. And he was a real character, but I can't tell you about him. Okay, so he's the one who built the Potala Palace. This is a painting in the Potala, please. This is a painting in the Potala Palace of the Great Fifth meeting the Emperor of China. Now, China and Tibet have this love-hate relationship. In fact, Tibetan Buddhism was a very strong factor in, China, not just Tibet, but in China as well. And here's the Great Fifth meeting the Emperor of China. The Chinese and the Tibetans interpret this event differently, obviously. The Tibetans say he was going to bless and instruct the emperor. So they're equal powers, right? And the Chinese say, no, he was coming to pay tribute to the emperor because China's the greater power. And this is an argument that no one's ever going to win, but it's how different people interpret the history. Okay. This is, I think, supposed to be the Forbidden City. And if you use your imagination and your visual memory from the lecture, you can actually see how the artist has some idea of what the pavilions in the Forbidden City are like. Okay. This is a painting from inside the Potala Palace. This weird tree structure is actually portraits of 357 monks, I think. And it shows chains of transmission. Like I say, Tibet is all about the connections, political and reincarnational. I believe that is supposed to be the Great Fifth. And there's all sorts of students and reincarnations and so forth. Okay. Now, the palace itself, a brief overview of the structure. The Potala Palace is actually two palaces. Right? The red one, which is the central portion, and the white one around it. And they serve two different functions. The red one is sort of the religious center. Okay? It has a meeting hall, it has meditation chambers, it has shrines, okay? And it has, not tombs, but chapels dedicated to former Dalai Lamas and so forth. Okay? So that's the central part. It has these gold roofs, which you can see from all over Lhasa, because the sun shines off them. Then all around that is the White Palace, which is more secular. It's the political arm of the building. Okay? This is where you have things like defensive bastions, storehouses. In the basement, you have torture chambers and prison cells and all the things that a government needs. Right? So that is the structure of the palace proper. This courtyard and the East Sunshine apartment above it are important. This is a view from that courtyard looking up. Because when he lived there, the Dalai Lama used to come out on that balcony to greet people. Now, can you think of any other religion where the leader comes out on a balcony and greets people? The Pope, yeah. The Pope comes out in St. Peter's and waves to people and sometimes gives an address. You saw this recently when they elected the new Pope. Okay, this is much like that. Okay, a group of monks or important people or lucky people gather in the courtyard and he comes out. Now remember, for them, he is Avalokiteshvara. I mean, this is a bodhisattva. So seeing him come out is not just like, whatever, seeing Mick Jagger or something like, wow, a famous person. I mean, this is really laying your eyes on a deity. There's lots of symbols floating around, like the wheel for Buddhism. This thing, this kind of knot, is supposed to symbolize the intertwining of religion and the state. Okay, that you can't separate them. Okay, that's a view of the palace, mostly the Red Palace, from the ground. And you see what I mean about the gold spires, the gold roofs, reflecting all over the city. Strong influence of Chinese architecture in the roofs. Here we are up on the roof. And there they are. Now you see a little better. They're not just points. They actually have shapes. And in some places, like there, you can see figures who are kind of holding chains. Right? Like these guys. And these guys. There are also sculptures of animals. Okay? Things like, birds and deer and so forth. It's not just decoration. Okay? In Tibet, virtually nothing is only decoration. Think back to the Forbidden City, okay, where I said that all the details on some level have a meaning, like to attract good luck or whatever. Much the same in Tibet. Okay? All right. So from the roof, that's the entrance. And this point will become clear over and over, but art in Tibet is really overwhelming. It's so in your face. Okay, this is the entrance. Look at this blazing color. I mean, all the red and gold, which is a very strong contrast, those two colors. Then all sorts of green and blue, designs, Chinese-inspired floral designs there. This is yak hair. I don't know what yak is in Turkish. It's that big hairy cow that they have in India and Tibet. Okay, so it's just this explosion of color in your face. Right now, this is one of the rooms inside. Okay, and if it were lighter in there, it would be the same thing. Just this riot of color in a very bleak landscape is a major difference. Okay, you can see in this room all of the little shrines. I mean, I don't think you could count the number of sculptures in the Potala Palace. It is simply full to the brim, and for a reason. Right? It's also not very well lit. Okay, here's just a hallway, right? And you see from the floor up the wall to the ceiling, everything is just overwhelming. It's sensory overwhelming. The point of Tibetan art really is to kind of smack all of your senses as hard as they can with a certain end in mind. And I'll get to this when we discuss their Buddhism. You should be on the lookout or be aware that there is a lot of Chinese art or Chinese-inspired art in the Potala Palace. Now, this love-hate relationship I mentioned extends to art. Among other things, when the Tibetans were very powerful and the Chinese were influenced by Tibetan Buddhism, they would send presents. They would send gifts. Okay? Silks and gold and stuff for the palace, and so that's where it comes from. Okay. Here is one of the rooms where the Dalai Lama could sit. This robe symbolizes his presence. Okay. This is not a footrest. This is actually a box for a manuscript. Okay. Tibetan books are not like our books, kind of taller than they are wide. They're very long rectangles like this, and you flip the pages up like that. And so this is a case for Buddhist scriptures. He's a monk. He's supposed to spend his time reading the scriptures. Okay? And lots of figures, paintings, and so forth. Just this tremendous buzz. Okay? This is a chapel. Again, a seat for him. These are some of the instruments he uses in the rituals. I'll talk about that briefly. And surrounded by works of art, some of which I'm going to talk about in this lecture. Okay? Because the Potala Palace is, we've talked about palace architecture. It's not just to give him a place to stay. It's to project something about him. And in Tibet, he's a monk. He's a Tibetan Buddhist monk. And Tibetan Buddhism is so saturated with symbolism that the palace functions as one giant machine of Buddhist symbolism. Okay. One last picture. This is another room. Here you can see better. His yellow robe is sort of piled up as if there's a person inside. But this couch, this is 100% Chinese. That would have been a gift from the Chinese to the Dalai Lama for religious reasons. Not because they think Tibet's going to invade, but because the emperor is influenced by Tibetan Buddhism. Okay, there's also a place for people to leave donations to what's now a museum. Now, it's actually very hard to get pictures inside the Potala Palace. For one thing, they restrict access. For another thing, it's quite dark. All right, so I don't have a lot of pictures of the inside. What I can do is, what you've seen and the details I'll provide will give you a sort of in to the Tibetan Buddhist worldview and what they were trying to accomplish in making this building. Alrighty. So we have to talk about Buddhism in Tibet. Thank you. Buddhism, now these days Tibet is just synonymous with Buddhism. When you think Tibet, you think of Buddhists. It was not always that way. Okay? The Tibetan plateau, geographically speaking now, this is not a political map. Geographically speaking, the Tibetan plateau is actually huge. But it's extremely difficult to live in. Okay, because it is very high. It's the highest place in the world. Tourists are usually advised not to just take an airplane, but to go somewhere close and then gradually ascend, with a train or car or something, because you'll get altitude sickness and some people could die. Now, way back when, the Tibetan plateau produced an empire. The Tibetans were actually very fierce, aggressive imperialists. You've heard of Harun al-Rashid, the caliph of the Islamic world. His army actually clashed with the Tibetans. Okay, so you can see how broadly they cast their net. This is a picture of Tibet. You can see just how thrilling it is. It's very difficult to live here. Here's a village, but what are they growing? They rely on their herds of yak and goats and so forth. And this is the nice part, right? This is where Tibetans go for vacation. Right? Much of Tibet looks like this, where you really seriously can't grow anything. Now typically, right down here, can I have the light one more time? Your grade will increase for all this work. Right? There is a monastery. Okay, so that is typical Tibet, a very harsh landscape dotted with monasteries. And this is one reason that when you go into the monastery, there's this explosion of color and symbolism I talked about, because that's such a sharp difference between the awful world outside and the world of, potential enlightenment inside. All right, now tough lands produce tough people. Anybody know or want to guess what these guys are doing?
They have a special way to walk to this where they do they are praying.
Yeah, well, one special place, yeah. These are villagers who are on a pilgrimage. Okay, there's a monastery in Lhasa, not the palace, a different building, which is very sacred to Tibetan Buddhists. And so what these guys do is they make a vow that they're going to travel there. But they don't just go. You know, like if you want to go to Mecca or Rome or something, you could get on an airplane. They walk. Okay? And they don't just walk. What they do is they walk 3 steps and they throw themselves on the ground. Right? Like this. Then they get up and they walk 3 more steps and down on the ground. Right? It can take a year to walk across Tibet doing this. Okay, that's why he's got this animal hide here. Basically shoes on his hands, and his face is black and blue from throwing himself on the ground. So like I say, tough land breeds tough people. Alrighty, now, where did all this come from? The beginnings of Buddhism in Tibet. Well, Buddhism was not there first, actually. The original Tibetan religion is something called Bön, which is not terribly well understood. It was some kind of shamanistic thing. There's spirits who live in the trees and the rivers and so forth, and you have to make them happy. It seems to have been fairly violent and sexual in nature. Nowadays, the Buddhists try to say that this is, you know, another form of Tibetan Buddhism, but it was there first. Now, Buddhism proper was introduced to Tibet in the 7th century, and it was Mahayana Buddhism. You remember we've talked about Buddhism and said that so far you've learned 2 sects, right? There's the Theravada, which is the older, more conservative one, and there's Mahayana, which is the later, more elaborate one with lots of, you know, savior bodhisattvas and so forth. That's the one that came to Tibet in the middle of the 7th century. Their king, Songtsen Gampo, is beloved for having introduced Buddhism into Tibet. And shortly thereafter, by historical standards, it was declared the state religion. Okay, so this is officially a Buddhist country. Now, they had to think about it, okay, because by the middle of the 8th century, there's actually all sorts of Buddhisms floating around. Right? Mahayana and Theravada is kind of oversimplifying it. Particularly, they were torn between the kind of Buddhism they were practicing in India, where it came from, and the kind of Buddhism they were practicing in China, which is this tremendously influential neighbor. So they had a debate at a monastery to choose between Indian and Chinese Buddhism. And the debate took 2 years. Okay? So they were obviously being very thorough about it. And eventually they chose the Chinese form of Buddhism, with lots of consequences. Alrighty, now that wasn't it. In fact, Buddhism went into serious decline in the 9th century. So it's not like they chose Buddhism and said, hooray, and after that it's just like Buddhism all the time. In the 9th century there was a big setback. Because first of all, there was an anti-Buddhist king named Langdharma who persecuted Buddhists. Right? He's probably a Bön guy. He persecuted the Buddhists terribly, so terribly that he was assassinated by a Buddhist monk in 842, who's like a, you know, cultural hero. Unfortunately, this just blew the whole country apart, because now there's no king, nobody can succeed him, and the country fragmented into all sorts of little tiny principalities. It was kind of a dark age for Tibet. Now, a couple works of art. This is a statue of Songtsen Gampo in the Potala Palace. There's kind of a basement chamber which is supposed to have been a cave where he studied Buddhism. Okay, a couple things you should notice. Important people always get gold skin, gold faces in Tibetan Buddhism. And notice on top of his hat there's another head. Okay? The more important you are, the more heads you have in this art. Okay, so that is Songtsen Gampo in his little chapel downstairs. This is Samye Monastery. Now you've seen this. I've used this in class before. Anybody remember why I talked about this?
Mount Meru. For Mount Meru.
No, everything's Mount Meru in these.
They tried to make a circle.
Well, exactly. It's supposed to be circular because it's supposed to be a model of the universe. Right, with this at the center and various things symmetrically placed, and I've talked about that. Now, what's important about the monastery historically is that this is where they had the debate to choose between Indian and Chinese Buddhism. I mean, there's lots you could say about this monastery, but I'll leave it at that. Right, now, after this dark age, you have a process which the Tibetans call the second diffusion. Diffusion is spread. Okay? So in the second diffusion, Buddhism comes back to life. And this takes a couple hundred years. But it's a serious revival, Renaissance. I mean, there's a thick book in my library called Tibetan Renaissance, because that's pretty much what this is. They come back to life. One thing they do is they import texts and teachers from India. I mean, people kind of go, all right, Buddhism is back. I'm a Buddhist. You're a Buddhist. What do we do? What's Buddhism again? So they actually send off to India and say, please send us books, send us teachers. So the Indians are only too happy to oblige. And so Indian Buddhism is all that much more influential on Tibet. Also in this period, the Buddhist monasteries start to grow. Okay? Like I say, Tibet is dotted with this, system of monasteries. Each one is more or less independent. They have their own, agricultural land. They have serfs, local peasants who have to work for the monastery. They can have their own army. They have charismatic leaders. Okay, and this is something a society can gel around. There's a couple of important figures from this time period who do things like show up on final exams. Right? One is a guy named Atisha. Now, Atisha was actually from India. In fact, I think he's from what's now Bangladesh. He's known as the great teacher because he's one of these guys who took the trip from India, and he spent something like 14 years in Tibet teaching the Tibetans what it is to be a real Buddhist. Okay? And he had strong opinions about things like sex, alcohol, vegetarianism, monastic life. And so he kind of like cracked the whip on the Tibetans to get them to fit his vision of what the right Buddhism is. Okay, and he's very beloved in Tibet as their big teacher. Another guy is Milarepa, who is kind of more interesting. Milarepa started out as basically a peasant boy. And I think his father had some land, but when the father died, an evil uncle took everything. So poor Milarepa and his mother are stuck with nothing. So Milarepa gets angry and he decides to learn black magic. So he goes off to this wizard or something, and he learns how to do black magic, and he learns to control the weather. And so what he does is, I think he rains lightning down on the evil uncle and his family, and he kills all sorts of people. And at this point, he's terribly distressed, okay, because now he's a mass murderer. And so he decides that he is going to, not just become a good boy, but actually get enlightenment in one lifetime. And by incredibly hard work, and there's all sorts of stories about his difficulties and his difficult teachers, Milarepa actually does it. He gets enlightened in one lifetime. So he's Tibet's hero because he goes from the worst kind of person, a multiple murderer, to an enlightened being in one lifetime, just by his own effort. So they're here. Now, lots of evidence survives from him. He wrote lots of songs. There's a place which is supposed to be his cave where he meditated. Right? And the results of all this were, Tibet came back to life as a completely Buddhist country. Okay, you've got this system of monasteries, which are, like I say, pretty independent, have charismatic leaders, and the country can gel around that culture. It's interesting to compare to China, which is run by this giant bureaucracy. Okay, of guys who take exams and literature and stuff, and it's kind of a governmental machine with all sorts of laws and cultural rules. In Tibet, it's all religious guys. Okay, it's sometimes crazy, sometimes charismatic, monks in monasteries, and the whole country coalesces around them. So that's Tibetan identity, right there. Okay. Here, for this, definitely. This is a very early Tibetan painting. This is Atisha. Okay? This is an early Tibetan portrait painting of Atisha. Okay? And he's sitting in the usual position with his feet crossed. Okay? He's making a teaching gesture, and he's holding a pen box or something in his hand to show that he was into texts. He's got a kind of throne or crown. He's got students next to him. It's a typical Tibetan painting, but nice and early. Okay. Here's a sculpture from the Potala Palace of Milarepa. You can always tell Milarepa because he's holding his ear. That means he's listening. Okay. I think this has to do with the fact that he learned his Buddhism from very harsh instructors, so he's listening to the teachings. He's also smiling because he embraced this Buddhist life very joyfully. He wrote lots of songs about bodhisattvas and Buddhas and so forth. So if you see an image of a smiling monk-looking guy with his hand to his ear, that's Milarepa. He's wearing white because I think Milarepa literally means the person dressed in cotton. And he's so popular that some Tibetan actually made a movie about Milarepa. There's going to be 2 movies. He only made the first part, which leads up to the killing everybody with lightning. And you can actually see it on YouTube. I don't know. I watched the first 5 minutes and it was, gripping, but I have other things to do. I don't know if the second part ever got made, but the first part is on YouTube, and it looks, fairly professional. All right. Now, like I say, the result of all of this is that Tibet becomes united around this federation, if you will, of independent monasteries. So this is one of those monasteries. This is one of Tibet's most important monasteries called Drepung. You don't have to know that. But this is what it looks like. And totally typical. You've got this awful landscape. Imagine trying to grow anything or something in there. But then this series of buildings, which are painted white and red, they're cities unto themselves. I mean, this place, I think, once had 10,000 monks living there. And this is what all cultural life revolves around. In some places you have big cities with merchants and all that stuff. In Tibet, it's more the monastic system. This is what the inside looks like. Okay, if you watch movies like Name of the Rose or whatever, you think of monastery in the Western sense as very gloomy and very quiet, and monks sort of, meditating silently all day. Completely different in Tibet. It's really loud, both visually and on your ears. Okay? Now, the monks will gather for meditation in a room like this. Each one gets a cushion. They have their specific robes and hats and so forth. And they're surrounded by bright colors and lots of symbolic decoration. Okay, here's a slightly different picture, because you can see things like the artworks that they meditate on. You remember the picture I showed you of the Great Fifth at the center of this tree structure? Okay, there's a copy of it up there. Okay, and again, all sorts of very sensorially powerful art all around them. Now, this is part of a monk's life. What do you think these guys are doing?
Studying martial arts.
Excellent response. Studying martial arts, because that's what you think of when you think of Oriental-looking guys in a monastery, right? It's like Shaolin Temple. No, any other? It's not martial arts. What else? What other guesses? Yeah.
Zen garden?
Zen gardens would be much more peaceful than this. I just realized he's wearing sneakers. It's very unmonk-like. Okay, this is a debate. Okay, this is part of the study process in a Tibetan monastery. Okay, the student is tested on his knowledge by being put into a debate with an older monk. But it's not just, one guy's at one table and the other guy's at the other table, and they have this very nice back and forth. You see what they're doing with their arms is, the guy on his feet is trying to shock the guy on the ground into losing his concentration. Okay, so it's not just, if I come up to you and I say, what's the Potala Palace and when was it built? Okay, that's what we would do. They go, what's the Potala Palace and when was it built? Okay, and he's trying to knock the guy off his concentration. because, you know, meditative traditions are all about keeping your concentration and forcing out distractions. And this process takes 20 years, right? After 20 years of this, you get you're called a geshe, which is like PhD. The format of your final exam will be this. Okay, now, Tibetan Buddhism in terms of its beliefs is a whole universe into itself. I mean, God, when I first started putting this course together, I'm like, oh cool, I can learn something about Tibetan Buddhism. And it turns out it's this colossal ocean of, you know, images and ideas and beliefs. But I'll try to sum up for you the main parts. Tibetan Buddhism is called Vajrayana Buddhism. Okay, so here is sect number 3. You learned Theravada, you learned Mahayana, and now the Tibetan version is called Vajrayana. Vajrayana means the diamond path, or also the thunderbolt path. Vajra implies something indestructible and that can blast through anything. Okay, so diamonds are indestructible, diamond path, but, you know, lightning or thunder blasts through trees and, you know, rocks and so forth, so it's also like that. It implies that this is the type of Buddhism that just can't be destroyed, that can force you through any obstructions in your way. It is supposed to be the final secret teachings of the Buddha. All right, they think that first the Buddha gave out the Buddhist teachings that everybody can do. Right, that's Theravada. That's like the easy Buddhism. Then, for the sort of smarter or more serious people, he gave out the Mahayana teachings. Okay, because they're a little more difficult, a little harder. Only some people can do them. And then at the end of his life, the Buddha gave out these secret teachings. Now, they're for the select few. Okay, so the Vajrayana is supposed to be the last secret teachings of the Buddha for the people who are most serious about enlightenment. It ends up being a series of techniques meant to completely change you in mind and body into an enlightened being. So there's yoga, you know, exercises and sitting on the ground. There's plenty of meditation and visualization and so on. Lots of chanting of mantras. Lots of rituals where, you know what I mean by ritual. Like a guy will stand there and he'll have objects and he'll chant things and he'll do things with the objects, and it's all symbolic and you're supposed to, you know, focus on it. And all of this is supposed to change you from a normal human being who's stuck in the world of birth and rebirth to a perfectly enlightened being worthy of nirvana. But the ideal in Tibet actually is not nirvana. It's not, okay, I want to get out of the cycle of birth and rebirth. Hey, I'm finished. Okay. The cultural ideal in Tibet is actually the bodhisattva. Now remember, this is the guy who, like, gets all the way to nirvana and then decides to wait for everybody else. You know, it's like, basically, you get to the finish line, but you refuse to cross until everybody else can go through. This is what they think that's the highest form of being, is you earn enlightenment, but you wait for everyone else to get it before you'll take it. And they take this totally seriously. I mean, you can actually go to Tibetan monks where they live in India and stuff, and actually take a bodhisattva vow. And you kind of swear in front of the monk that from now on, you'll do everything you can to get enlightenment so that you can guide others to enlightenment. It's called a bodhisattva vow. I imagine it's pretty hard to keep, but that's what they do. Vajrayana Buddhism has an enormous catalog of gods. And I mean, some gods are actually just different aspects of other gods, and it's very difficult to keep track of. That's why there's so much art, is to give people something to concretely look at. And it is full of secret symbolism. Okay, this is the most esoteric, mysterious kind of Buddhism there is. Okay, the Theravada, by comparison, is like totally open and rational. Okay. One part of the system is gurus and lamas. Now, a guru is a teacher. A lama is a monk. Okay, now sometimes they're the same. Guru means someone who can guide you to enlightenment. And it's not just anybody. I mean, I'm teaching you because somebody's paying me money to do it. Okay? But a guru could be just some crazy guy in a cave. Right? If you find him and talk to him, you're supposed to find your guru. Right? And then by talking just to him, you can learn all the secrets and progress. Right? Lamas, like I say, are monks. Lama actually means teacher, I think. And there's lots of ceremonies where you are kind of granted the ability to learn. Right? I can't just pick up a book, and study Tibetan Buddhism and get enlightened. I have to be granted the mystical capacity for it, because otherwise I'm just going to confuse myself. Right? And so there's whole ceremonies where 1,000 people will sit in an auditorium, and the Dalai Lama will say, hocus pocus dominokus, and then everybody in the audience is able to learn the next step. Okay. Now, one piece, I guess, and then we'll take a break. Thank you. This is just an example of how seriously they take their stuff. This is a sutra, right? A Buddhist text. That's one page. That's the next page. It's in 4 languages, Tibetan at the top, Mongolian, Manchu, and Chinese. And you can see, everything just has to be full of these little representations of deities. And there's tons of them. And you can see the artistic quality, the materials and the craft of the paintings that went into this thing, which shows the respect for the scriptures. But I also want to highlight one point before we take the break, and that's this. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Our modern conception of art as something that you do to express yourself is very rare in the world. In places like Tibet, art is serious business because it's simply the technology of the belief system. Right? The Tibetan artist is following instructions. He has to draw things, paint things, sculpt things exactly the right way because they're tools. They're not just, how pretty, I'll put it in my room. These are things that you use as part of your meditative practice to become a bodhisattva. And so keep that in mind when you're looking at all this stuff we look at. None of it is just the free creation of a happy artist. Okay? These are trained craftsmen producing the technology, as it were, for the meditation. Okay, let us take 10 minutes. After that, we'll continue. All right, let me fire up your interest in Tibet again. This is another very fundamental part of Tibetan Buddhism, the prayer wheel. You can actually see this is at the base of the Potala Palace in Lhasa, this wall down here. Now what these things are, they're not bells, they're wheels. So they spin. And each one has a phrase written on it numerous times. The phrase is Om Mani Padme Hum, which is roughly translated something like Hail the jewel in the lotus. And the idea is this is a magical phrase. Every time you say this, it's like you get points, okay? You're kind of closing off all doors to rebirth. Because Om Mani Padme Hum, there's 6 syllables, 6 possible realms in which you could be born. There's a whole thing to it. And every time you say it, you're kind of blocking off potential rebirth. Now, you can't just say it all the time. So the idea is if you write it on a wheel and turn the wheel, that's equivalent to saying it. Okay, and so it goes off into the universe and you get your points. And so there are these things on the streets and you walk by and just spin these things. They also have them on handles, and sometimes you'll see, if you've ever seen guys, they kind of twirl this. They're doing something else, but they're twirling something in one hand. That's a prayer wheel, and it's sending this prayer out. You can see one. I have one in GIF form, right, an animated GIF, which I got off the internet. So I'm earning points right now. okay, with that thing. And that, in Tibetan, that says Om Mani Padme Hum. You can even, I saw on the one website, there's a program that will turn your hard disk into a prayer wheel. So basically, every time you save a file or open a file or something, and the disk spins, you get points. So the more times I give this lecture, the better a future I have as a Buddhist. Now, I said that Tibetan Buddhism is just full of ritual. Okay, monks basically doing ceremonies where they have what are basically magical objects. And they do things with these objects which have no purpose other than symbolism. Okay? One of the most important objects is the dagger. Okay, this is a ritual dagger. I mean, its official name is Purba, but you don't need to know that. And notice it's very special. It's not just any knife. Okay? It has 3 blades. Right? Holding the blades are these kind of monster mouths. Okay? Up on top, you've got an angry face. We'll see him later. And then at the very top, I'll use the cursor. This thing up here, that's a Vajra. You'll see more of that in a second. And the monk doing the ceremony, he'll wave it around and he'll say things. And at one point, I think he stabs it into a pile of grain or something. And all of this, all these details, the 3 blades, okay, the monster mouths, the angry face on the handle, everything has some significance. And a big part of being a monk is memorizing all that. And so when the monk does this, you're like, okay, now that's the 2 different worlds, and then there's the gods beyond, and I'm supposed to do this, and all of that is supposed to be in your mind as a meditative focus when you're at one of these rituals. Right? These are 2 more important magical objects. This is a Vajra, okay, a so-called thunderbolt, or a double Vajra. And it just looks like basically a paperweight. In fact, in Nishantasha, there's this store that sells kind of Indian, Southeast Asian stuff, and I saw one there. I should have bought it. But it actually has tons of symbolism, right? Will you turn that phone off now? Thank you. It's got all sorts of symbolism, okay? There's 2 ends, which are the 2 worlds, the physical and the spiritual. All right, and then it's hard to see, but there's these monsters coming out, and this is the monster's tongue, which all comes together at this point. One end is male, one end is female. I mean, all sorts of symbolism. Okay, you'll very frequently see these things in Tibetan art. And what goes with the Vajra is this bell, which has a Vajra on top. So this is male, this is female. This is compassion, this is wisdom. You wave them around, you put them together, you put them down. I mean, all the things he's doing have meaning. I mean, you read these objects and you read these ceremonies to transform yourself into an enlightened being. Now, some of the ritual objects are a little ghoulish. This is a monk and he's holding 2 things. One is a drum and one is a trumpet. Look at the trumpet. What does that look like?
Bone.
A bone. Guess what kind of bone it is? Human bone. Yeah, it's a leg bone. It's a thigh bone. Right? The drum is actually 2 drums. And you see how there's a thing hanging off it. And so when he turns it like this, it'll go dum 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 like that. Well, guess what the drums are made of? Human something. Okay, the top of a skull. Okay, so if you cut it like this, you get a bowl, and you stick 2 of them together and wrap a skin over them, you get a drum. Now, I was going to say they're not trying to freak you out, but they are. Okay, using dead body parts like this is important because it reinforces in your mind that nothing is permanent. Right? You think your teacher or your mother or you are kind of, you're always going to be here. Life is great, whatever. Well, maybe not in Tibet, but you don't think about death and moving on. And this is supposed to focus your mind on the fact that you are material, right? When you die, your body is going to basically go back into the eternal cycle of destruction and regeneration. A popular form of getting rid of a dead body in Tibet is to let the birds eat it. Okay, so specially trained monks will basically chop up the dead monk and leave out the meat and bones for the birds to eat, because the material that made him up is now going back into the flux. It's called a sky funeral. I'm not showing any of that because that's really gross. There we go. Now, less grossly, this is an art. They're making an art object called the sand mandala. Mandala I've talked about. It's this diagram of the universe. But what they're doing is, this is from an exhibition in like Vienna or something, where these Buddhist monks, first they draw it. And remember, there's rules. There's a specific way to draw the mandala. And then what they do is they've got these metal pipes, and they fill them with sand, different colors of sand. And basically by tapping or scraping the pipe, you can get it to give a flow of sand. And they fill all of the compartments on this drawing. It takes like 3 weeks or something to make. It's a very long process. When it's finished, you've got this huge, beautiful colored mandala with all the symbolism and wheels and flames and vajras and blah, blah, blah. Then what do? They let the wind blow it apart. Or they dump it into a river. Okay? To show that even the universe, dissolves into other things. Nothing is permanent, not even the world. Similarly, this is a nice little statue of the Buddha, as well as these flowers. Now, it looks a little yellowish because it's made of butter. Okay. This is a butter sculpture. Yak butter, of course. Now, they dye the butter, and you can get, when the butter is cold, you can actually get very great detail into it, like his clothing and stuff. Now, that's very nice. You make the butter sculpture. You might use it in a ceremony. But then what happens? When it gets warm, right, the butter sculpture melts. Right? Impermanence, right? Forcing you to confront the fact that everything is going to basically melt away and not be there anymore. Okay. Now, all of this is the basic philosophical background, but how about some of the characters or figures in Tibetan Buddhism? Well, obviously the number one guy has to be the Buddha, right? Well, yes and no. Okay? In Tibetan Buddhism, there's the Buddha, but also the Buddhas. Okay. Now, the Buddha is our buddy, Shakyamuni Buddha. Okay? You remember him from the first lecture, or you should. Born in India, he was a prince. He decided to renounce the world and meditate, and he discovered nirvana and so on. Great. Okay. But turns out he's actually not as special as you think, because he lived in time. So he's the real guy from a real place. But he's only one of many who have come to the world, lived in a specific place, gotten enlightened, and taught other people. In fact, our Buddha is only the fourth. I shouldn't say only, he's the fourth. I mean, before him there were 3 other Buddhas in the unimaginably distant past. So there's a cycle, okay? The world is full of ignorance and attachment. Somebody gets enlightened, teaches everybody else. Then there's Buddhism. Then people forget about it. They don't follow it seriously, and it goes into decay. And then another Buddha comes, and he gets enlightened and teaches everybody. Okay. So Shakyamuni over in India, he was number 4. And right now, there's all sorts of Buddhists in the world and so forth. But again, everybody's going to forget, and Buddhism will disappear from the world. And then number 5 will come, and that'll be the last one. We promise. Okay. So basically right now we're waiting for that 5th Buddha to show up. His name's Maitreya. I'll put that on the screen in a few slides. Interestingly, there have been people in history who have tried to say that I'm Maitreya. Right? I'm the new Buddha, so everybody follow me. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Now that's the sort of the Buddha on earth, but there are also a series of celestial Buddhas, and I'm just not going to bother you with them. because it's too much. But just be aware that in addition to Buddhas who are human beings on earth, like you and me, who can teach other people, there are also these celestial Buddhas, or kind of cosmic Buddhas, who are not individual human beings. They're sort of, cross-dimensional time-space beings, whatever, sometimes called Tathagatas. There are 5 of them, and I'll leave it at that. They have names, and they have different directions that they govern, and colors, and like I say, it's an encyclopedia of knowledge, but for the moment, just be aware that there's actually a lot of Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. This is a painting of Shakyamuni Buddha. In Tibet, he is invariably shown as a monk, a normal human guy. Okay, so he doesn't have multiple arms, he doesn't have wings or anything like that. He's just a man. Remember the all-important bump on his head and the ears. Okay, and he's in the position you might recognize where he's sitting and touching the ground to call the earth to witness. It's a technical gesture. Now, he's obviously surrounded by all sorts of good stuff. He's on a throne, and there's flowers, and here, basically, goddesses coming to pay tribute to him. But this is just the historical Buddha. Now, he is important because they paint big pictures of him. A Tibetan painting is called a tanka, which literally means something you can carry, I think. They tend to be on silk, which means you can roll them up, and that means they get very well preserved. Okay? And some of them are really big, like the side of a mountain. And there's actually a festival. I think this is for the Buddha's birthday. I'm not entirely sure. They make these huge paintings, and the whole countryside comes out to look at them. Why? Well, making the painting gets you points, right? You're sort of building up good karma, or points towards your enlightenment, and looking at the painting gives you points, right? Now he's been distracted somehow, naughty, right? But notice some of these people, they'll stare at the Buddha. They have meditations to do. They think about him and his message and so forth. It's all you're doing everything you can, like I say, to change yourself, your very way of thinking, into the form of somebody who can be enlightened. They also, remember what the Potala Palace looks like. It's a very high wall. They also drape giant tankas off the wall. Like in Turkish holidays, you see giant Turkish flags hanging from buildings. Like 10 stories high in Maslak or wherever. Same deal, but with pictures of the Buddha. Okay. Now here's one of the celestial Buddhas, and with them it's totally different. This one, I can't remember his name, Amoga Siddhi, these long Indian names. He's kind of greenish colored, it's crown and jewels and all that. He's sitting on a lotus throne. There are various celestial creatures come to pay devotion to him. And remember, with Tibetan art, it's a tool, it's a technology. You don't just paint it and go, hey, good job. You really got his facial expression really nicely. Right? You sit with it. You stare at it. You put yourself into it. That's one of them. This is a slightly weirder painting. This is a different one, and he's surrounded by all sorts of pictures of other celestial Buddhas. Okay, so this is really something that is going to occupy the meditator for a good deal of time. It's also got that typically Tibetan, pushiness. This red is just so aggressive on your eyes. Okay. Now, here's something to show you Tibetan valuation. This is the Buddha. That statue, see, he's on a lotus throne. Okay. That statue is made of pure gold. This guy next to him is the great fifth Dalai Lama. Okay. Notice he's at almost exactly the same level. They're exactly the same size. Okay, so you're really putting the great fifth at the same level as the Buddha. Now inside, this is only silver. I mean, only. You know, this is silver, this is gold. So clearly the Buddha is more important than the Great Fifth. But it shows the prestige that the Great Fifth has, that they would compare him to the Buddha this openly. Okay, now, bodhisattvas are actually the more important thing. The Buddha got everything started. And the celestial Buddhas, you know, they hear your prayers and they're good in medicine and all kinds of things. But it's the bodhisattvas who really count. Remember, bodhisattva is anyone who achieves enlightenment but doesn't take it. In Tibet, they divide Buddhists into levels. Right? The lowest level is someone who says, I want my own life to be better. Right? So I'll follow all the rules and do my prayers and stuff, and hopefully I'll get good luck. You know, I'll have money or successful, you know, animals or whatever, you know, my yaks and so forth. That's the lowest level. Next level is someone who wants a better next life. So I'll be a very good Buddhist, hoping that next time I'm born, I'll be in a higher social level, or I'll have a better life. Okay, so you accumulate karma. Remember, karma is the universe paying you back for your good or evil. You get good karma, and hopefully in my next life I'll have a better time. Okay. Then above that is someone who wants to become a Buddha. I mean, just escape into nirvana altogether. Get out of the universe, right? You realize that life sucks, existence is suffering, and so forth, and you work at it so that you just won't be born again. Okay. But even higher than that is the person who wants to achieve that and then wait. Okay, you know, get all the good karma, purge all the bad karma, earn enlightenment, and then say, no, all of you first. Okay, all of you, everybody out there, all the bugs and snakes and birds and every living being should go before me. That is the Tibetan ideal. Okay, so for them, as in Mahayana, the bodhisattvas are larger than life. Yeah?
Does it have a role like converting everyone into Tibetan Buddhism or starting a worldwide revolution?
Yeah. Well, there's nothing about a worldwide revolution. And I don't think they're particularly aggressive about converting people, in like some religions I could think of. But there is this sense that ultimately everybody will get enlightened. Remember, for them the universe is very old, and there's lots of time. You know, so ultimately every living being will be enlightened, but that could be trillions of years. You actually remind me, one way the Tibetans have of making sure everybody's nice to everybody else is you say, well, look, everybody dies and gets reborn as somebody else, right? Or something else. Well, think how old the universe is. This has been going on for trillions of years. Therefore, every possible combination of rebirths has happened, and therefore, every living being in a previous life was your mother. So you used to be my mother, right? All of you used to be my mother. You know, the dog who barked at me on the way to the service used to be my mother, right? If you think of how many rebirths there have been, they were all my mother. So I have to be as nice to all of you and to the dog and to everybody as I would be to my mother. So lend me some money. Anyway, back to bodhisattvas. There are three main ones, two of whom you have already met. The first one is Avalokiteshvara. Talked about him a lot. Okay, he's the kind of patron saint, or the main bodhisattva of Tibet. He's the one they like best. He represents the compassion of the Buddha. The Buddha looking out at the universe and feeling really bad that there's so much suffering, okay, and wanting to do something to help. That's Avalokiteshvara. That's the main Tibetan virtue. The second bodhisattva to care about is Vajrapani. Pop quiz. What was the other name of Avalokiteshvara? Padmapani. Padmapani means lotus in the hand. Vajrapani now means thunderbolt in the hand. He represents the power of the Buddha. I mean, once you have the knowledge the Buddha has, just nothing can get in your way. Right? You can knock down any obstacle or illusion. And the third one is named Manjushri. Now, he represents the wisdom of the Buddha. Okay, the Buddha now knows what is illusion and what is not, what is true and what is not, and that gets its own bodhisattva. You may have guessed, he comes along a little later, because we already had these two in Ajanta, which is, hundreds of years before. Manjushri came a little later. The Manchus, I mentioned in the course of the Forbidden City lecture, they used to be known as the Jurchens, but they changed their name because they're Buddhists and they're trying to take this. So Manchu comes from Manjushri. Shri is like Lord. Okay, now in addition to those three, there's a lot of other bodhisattvas, but there's two I'm going to tell you. One is Maitreya. Now this is the guy I mentioned before. He's going to be Buddha number 5. He is currently waiting. He exists in another dimension or something, but he's waiting for the world to need him. So certain things have to happen, like basically what? Buddhism has to be forgotten. All the Buddha's relics have to be moved to one stupa and burned. Every religion is like this. There will be signs that it's time. And then Maitreya will come back and he'll get enlightened, and this time it'll be permanent. Right? Then everybody gets it, but we have time to wait. Estimates on his arrival vary. Some say it'll be next year, and some say it'll be in 5 million years, and whatever. Okay, now the last bodhisattva to know about is Tara. Tara is a goddess. Tara was born when Avalokiteshvara felt so bad about suffering in the universe that he shed a tear. And when the tear hit the ground, Tara was born. Now Tara is quite popular. She actually comes in several colors. There's a white Tara, there's a green Tara, there's a yellow Tara. I want to say a blue. And they're associated with different things. For example, I think yellow Tara maybe is associated with money. Not getting rich, but having enough. So, of course, very popular to pray to. Tara, help me out. Now, you remember Avalokiteshvara from the Ajanta caves. There's the lotus in the hand. For reasons unknown, has blue skin and a crown. The crowns and jewelry usually are supposed to mean the glory, the high status of the bodhisattvas. Not that they're rich in our terms. Now this is Avalokiteshvara in Tibetan art. In Tibet he's known as Chenrezig. You don't need to know that. This, if you look carefully, and I'll show you a close-up in a second, this is Avalokiteshvara. Behind him, that's not a halo or the sun. That's all his arms. Okay, he has 1,000 arms. 2 of them are in front of him, holding a kind of a ball. And then other ones are holding other things. And then behind him are the other 990 or whatever. Okay? He also has 11 heads. This picture is there in the Potala Palace, in one of the Dalai Lama's chapels. There we go. Okay, so this is Avalokiteshvara. You can always tell him on final exams, for example, because 2 of the hands are holding it looks like a ball, but it's called the wish-granting jewel. So if you have a wish, this jewel will grant your wish. Okay. Other hands hold other things. For example, flowers, a bow. One's got to have a vajra, but I can't see it. And then there's all of these hands are his other arms. He has 1,000 arms. And each hand has an eye in the palm. It's hard to see. Now, is he some kind of anatomical freak? No. Okay. The hands and the eyes are supposed to be symbolic. They represent Avalokiteshvara's ability to help you anywhere in the universe. Okay? So don't think that just because you're in some village in Tibet that you're out of reach of Avalokiteshvara. Right? He can help you. He can see your troubles, and he can help you wherever you are. Also count the heads. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The 10th one has a kind of angry look, and you'll see that in a second. That's Vajrapani. Here's a sculpture. You imagine he must be very difficult to do in sculpture, okay, if you're going to make all those hands. But they did it. This is a sculpture in the Potala Palace. I mean, I obviously got it from a book, but it's in the Potala Palace. I want to say, it's not gilded, I can't remember the term, but it's sort of gold mixed with another metal, with turquoise for value. And here's all the hands, and you see each hand has an eye. And there's the 11 heads. And so, symbolic and, again, an object of meditation. Contemplation, a better word. So that's Avalokiteshvara. Now this guy was Vajrapani. This thing in his hand, you should, if you can see it at all, you should now be able to recognize as a Vajra. Okay, that's that thing with the looks like a hollowed out cage of some sort. Okay, very small, but he's a good-looking guy. I mean, let's face it, he looks like some kind of Bollywood movie star. You know, with the sort of buff body, shirtless of course, and the crown and the sultry expression. He's recognizably human. Well, in Tibet, Vajrapani undergoes kind of a change, and he has a monstrous look to him. The background's a little distracting in this picture, but I mean, check out his face. He's got this fierce, angry expression. He has an eye in the middle of his forehead. Fangs. His head is usually shown as flaming. In one hand, maybe this one, actually, or that one. It's hard to see. And he always holds a Vajra. I mean, that's his name, right? Vajrapani. Vajra in the hand. He's got a kind of a snake for a shawl or a scarf. Kashkol. His snake, he's got a snake kashkol. And his big heavy body is stepping on a figure. The figure represents ignorance. And they're always crushing an enemy, right? And in this case, the enemy is your ignorance of the fact that nothing is real and existence is suffering and so forth. Okay, so that's a nice little sculpture of Vajrapani. Okay. Now this is Manjushri. Remember, Manjushri represents the wisdom of the Buddha. So what is he doing holding a sword? Anybody want to guess? Why would the Bodhisattva of wisdom be holding a sword? You got to think symbolically here.
Ignorance. So to cut down.
Precisely, exactly. Nice work. You know, your next life is going to be awesome. The sword isn't for killing people. It's for cutting through illusion. It's for cutting through ignorance. Okay? Nothing to do with fighting. It's totally symbolic. Next to him, the sculptor has done a nice job. There's a plant growing. I can't remember what kind of plant, but on it there's that gold thing there is a bookcase, a book holder. Remember in the picture from the Dalai Lama's room I showed you, I said it wasn't a footrest. That box is what they keep precious books in. And so that grows next to Manjushri because he represents wisdom, which is an intellectual thing. Manjushri is very popular in East Asia, especially with students. Because when exam time comes, who better to help you than, the incarnation of the Buddha's wisdom? Alrighty. Now these three, since they're all related to the Buddha, are very often seen as a trio. Okay? So which is which? From left to right. Left, Manjushri as the sword. Middle, right, Avalokiteshvara because of this the wish-granting jewel. And Vajrapani is the easiest one to recognize because he's got this demon kind of face. And a flaming head, sure. Now, notice what they're wearing. I mean, I want to stress again the close, if not always happy, relationship between China and Tibet. These are Chinese silks. Okay? The Dalai Lama was immensely prestigious with the Chinese for a long time. You know, these days they hate him because they think he's trying to break up their country. But in the old days, he was a major religious figure, and it's much like Europeans paying honor to the Pope. Okay, that's why there's so much colorful goodies in this room, is because the Chinese supplied it. Okie doke. Now here's a more modern painting. You can find these all over the internet. You know, modern painters, usually American, who fancy themselves Tibetan Buddhists, and so they paint these paintings. So there is Avalokiteshvara with fewer arms this time, Manjushri, and a very spectacular Vajrapani. Okay. This is Maitreya. Remember, the Buddha who's waiting to come to the world to save everybody. I really don't know if he has special attributes. I mean, I thought that he would be sitting in a certain way, like, you know, ready to get up, like when the world needs him, but I can't see any. What you should pay attention to is the fact that how lavish this sculpture is. I mean, the metalwork, if you sit with it and look closely at all of the flames and heads and flowers and, you know, what we would call angels, and down here there's two monks, you know, lamas, gurus. The fact that he's been given silken scarf and so forth shows you just how seriously they take it. I mean, the artist is given all the wherewithal to make a spectacular sculpture of Maitreya. I have to say, I don't know why you would pray to Maitreya because he's not here yet. I mean, you know, basically, in the future, 5 million years from now, when you come to Earth, help me out. Doesn't sound very logical. But that's how it is. Okay, now this is a painting of Tara in her various forms. This middle one is green Tara. And, of course, multiple arms, the symbolism of sitting on a tiger skin, stepping on a lotus. If I had gone to a Tibetan monastery school for 20 years, I could tell you all about it. But I haven't. Here's yellow Tara, who rides an elephant. Here's white Tara, who rides a goose. Okay. Up there, a couple more, red and blue. And, of course, you got to have a guru, a monk. It is, I can't say it enough times, Tibetan thought is all about these connections. Okay? So-and-so is a guru, he taught so-and-so, who was reborn as so-and-so, who is actually an emanation of this bodhisattva. Okay? And the art reinforces that. These paintings are really interesting, but they're hard to come by. And this is a much more clean and modern one with Avalokiteshvara, small Manjushri, small Vajrapani, and then up there, you know, monks from the Dalai Lama's order, as well as green and white Tara. All right. Now, the fierce gods. This is one of the cooler parts of Tibetan Buddhism, if not the coolest. So far, with the exception of Vajrapani, all the gods, the bodhisattvas and gods and stuff we've looked at have been helpful, nice, compassionate, wise. But part of the secret esoteric aspect of Tibetan Buddhism is that the gods have angry aspects or sides to them. So they're called fierce gods or wrathful gods. Now, the thing is, they are freaky, but it's because they're powerful so that they can defend Buddhism or individual people like the Dalai Lama. It's not because they're angry at you. Right? Now, they're called angry or fierce or wrathful gods, but it's not like Christian art where if you see a demon, he's coming for you. Okay, that's somebody that the devil sends to torment you because you've been bad. Right? These guys are not out to get you. Now, they are scary because there's shock value in them, but they are supposed to be, they're on your side. Now, there are a number, but I'll tell you, I think 3. One is named Mahakala. Mahakala means big black, because he is. He is the fierce form of Avalokiteshvara. Okay, so think of it. Avalokiteshvara is compassionate. He cried when he saw how much suffering is in the universe. But he's got an angry side. Okay, just like, a mother. Always loving and caring and tender, but sometimes you just gotta, right? And that's basically how it comes down with this. There's also Yamantaka, also known as Vajrabhairava. He is tied for my favorite, okay? The story behind him is, Yamantaka means defeater of death. And the story of his origin is, there was a Tibetan Buddhist who spent his whole life doing the rituals and the meditation and the bowing and so forth. And he got to the point where if he did one more, he would be enlightened. And right before he did that one, he died. Right? The death came and took him. And he was so angry that he had lost his chance that he turned into this wrathful god and basically beat the crap out of death. And death, apologized. And so he gets to remain the defeater of death. Now, he's a popular figure. There's a website, yamantaka.org. And you can get pictures and, meditations and stuff. He's the fierce form of Manjushri. And there's also a goddess named Peldan Lhamo, who is the protector of the city of Lhasa and the Dalai Lama. All right, let me show you a couple. This is Avalokiteshvara. Nice, loving, compassionate. But this is Mahakala. Okay? And they go out of their way to make it as shocking and freakish as possible. Okay, with the demon face, the 5 skulls woven into the hair, the flames, okay, holding what look like, the skins or limbs of animals that he's ripped apart. He's crushing an elephant. He's holding a skull with brains in it. Okay, so it's as shocking as possible. And this is why these are not the first thing you see when you're a Tibetan monk, right? You have to go through a certain series of progressions before you're ready for this kind of thing. Right? That's Manjushri, all wise and intelligent and knowing and stuff, and this is Yamantaka. Okay. One of my very favorites, easy to recognize because he's got a buffalo head. Okay, you'll see the horns. On top of him is an angry face. On the top of that is, I think, Avalokiteshvara. He's got all the skulls. He's holding a skull bowl with brains in it. Okay, this is some animal that he's ripped apart. There's a body speared on a stick. A necklace of heads. Okay, everything as violent and ferocious as possible. But that's because that's the power of these deities to blast through whatever demons are causing problems. And the best part of it is, in Tibetan meditation, you focus on this, you visualize this, and you imagine that this is you. Okay, so when you're sitting there on your prayer cushion, right, you are imagining yourself as this, right, to kind of, get that Buddha nature into you. And it's very therapeutic. I mean, you got to try it. Just imagine that you're having a bad day, so meditate and imagine that this is you. You'll feel a lot better. Okay, and this is Pelden Lamo. Pelden Lamo is recognizable basically by two things. She rides a donkey, which has an eye in its butt. And she wears as her shalvar, whatever, a skin. You see this guy? This is the flayed skin of a man who was her son. And the story, there's a couple stories. One of them is that her husband was very evil and was killing all sorts of people. He was a king. And he was killing all sorts of people, and she begged him to stop, and he wouldn't. So she killed their son so that he would understand the pain people feel when someone they love has been killed. The other story is she realized that he would be the guy to kick Buddhism out of Tibet. That he would end Buddhism in Tibet, so she killed him. And she wears his skin as a shawl. So she protects the Dalai Lama. Nice to have her on your side. Yeah?
Does she have another good version?
I don't think so, but I'm not positive.
Vajrapani, does he have...
Well, he's already fierce. But I'm sure they all, believe me, dude, they all have like 20 aspects. I can't even begin to dip into Wikipedia if you have like 12 hours to spare. Okay, now finally, last thing I want to tell you about is called Yabyum. So you've got all these gods. They have needs too. The term Yabyum literally means father-mother. But what Yabyum is it's a depiction of gods having sex. These are Tibetan Buddhist deities in sexual positions with their consorts. Okay, so every god has a boyfriend or girlfriend. You know, there's somebody for everybody. And they are shown doing it. Now this is not just sort of perversion. It's always, as always, it's symbolic. Okay? To be enlightened, you need two qualities. Two specific qualities to get there. Right? One is compassion. Sometimes called skillful means, which is associated with the male, which is interesting because it's kind of backwards. Usually in cultures, women are the compassionate ones, and men are the smart ones. In Tibet, that typical symbolism is reversed. So you need to have compassion and wisdom. So if you're compassionate but you don't know anything, you won't get enlightened. If you are wise but not compassionate, you also won't get anywhere. You have to have the two together. And if one's male and one's female, the ultimate symbol of male-female togetherness is sex. It also represents a unity over dualism, over thinking that things are different. Right? There's me and there's non-me. Right? Here's me, and all of you are non-me. But because reality is an illusion, you are supposed to be led to realize that that is an illusion. There's actually one. So two becoming one, I mean, there's a very basic natural way to show this. So here is Vajrapani and his honey. You kill the lights, it's a nice sculpture, yeah. Right, standing on ignorance and everything. But now, see, there's the Vajra in that hand, and here's the snake-like scarf. But now here is his consort. These sculptures are often composed of two anatomically correct sculptures which you can join in just the right place. So the Tibetan metalworkers are very skillful and probably have a lot of fun. And one of my favorites, okay, this is Yamantaka, right, because he's got the buffalo head with the horns. And well, like when I say there's somebody for everybody, he has a consort. If you look, you can see that she's got a terrifying kind of screaming demon face as well. And they are, you know, together. Now he can still hold his skull full of brains in one hand without spilling it.
Also, there is no change in his face expression.
This is what he looks like when he's having a good time. Okay, so that's, Tibetan art can be pretty down home and shocking, and Yabyum depictions are one of the best ways. Okay, so that will conclude our discussion of the Potala Palace as a storehouse and symbol of Tibetan culture. And just as a final footnote, I want to point out that I keep saying Tibetan Buddhism was very prestigious in China. Well, it was so prestigious that the Emperor of China built a fake Potala Palace. This is in a place, I think it's near Beijing. So it's totally in China, not Tibet. And it was built by the Qing Emperor, I can't remember which one, as a deliberate copy of the Potala Palace. Right? He's so impressed with the Tibetans, let's say, or maybe Tibetan Buddhism, or he just wants to keep every possible god happy, that he actually built a mock-up, so to speak, of the Potala Palace in China. Okay, so that will be the end of that. Next week we do our last major work of Eastern art, which is Japanese.